Far Cry. Far Cry is a franchise of first-person shooter games, all of which have been published by Ubisoft. The first game, Far Cry, was developed by Crytek to premiere their CryEngine software, and released in March 2004. Subsequently, Ubisoft obtained the rights to the franchise and the bulk of the development is handled by Ubisoft Montreal with assistance from other Ubisoft satellite studios. The following games in the series have used a Ubisoft modified version of the CryEngine, the Dunya engine, allowing for open-world gameplay. There have been 5 main games in the series, along with 3 standalone expansions. The first game, initially developed for Microsoft Windows, also saw a number of ports to video game consoles. The Far Cry games, due to the history of their development, do not have any significant shared narrative elements, but instead share a theme of placing the player in a wilderness environment where they must help fight against one or more despots that control the region as well as surviving against wild animals that roam the open spaces. The Far Cry games feature a robust single-player campaign with later titles offering cooperative campaign support. The games also offer competitive multiplayer options and the ability for users to edit the game's maps for these matches. The Far Cry games have generally been well received for their open-world gameplay despite their stories receiving mixed reviews and are considered commercial successes. Ubisoft reports that through 2014, lifetime sales of the Far Cry franchise has exceeded 20 million units. History. The first Far Cry game was developed by the German studio Crytek, and premiered their CryEngine software. One of Crytek's goals with the CryEngine was to be able to render realistic outdoor spaces with large viewing distances, which was a unique feature compared with other game engines at the time of its release. The CryEngine was originally demonstrated as a tech demo at Electronic Entertainment Expo, E3, 1999 under the name Exile, Dinosaur Island specifically aimed at NVIDIA graphics processors. The demo allowed the user to explore a virtual tropical island populated with dinosaurs, showcasing the size of the virtual world that the CryEngine could handle. Following E3 1999, they secured a deal with NVIDIA to distribute Exile alongside all NVIDIA cards as benchmarking software, as at the time the CryEngine was the most demanding game engine on the market. Ubisoft made a deal with Crytek to build out Exile into a full AAA title, and obtained publishing rights for this title. 5. This game develops the story of player character Jack Carver, who stumbles upon the genetic research of Dr. Krieger and the Krieger Corporation, on a fictional Micronesia island, to create powerful Trigen beasts as weapons later sold to mercenaries. Far Cry released in March 2004 for Microsoft Windows to critical praise and strong sales, with over 730,000 units sold in the first 4 months. 6. Following Far Cry's release, Crytek, wanting to show that CryEngine had other applications, signed a deal in July 2004 to develop a gaming franchise with publisher Electronic Arts, EA, a direct competitor to Ubisoft. This franchise became the Crysis series, and through which Crytek continued to improve their CryEngine. 7 With Crytek unable to work with them, Ubisoft assigned its studio Ubisoft Montreal to help port the title to the various game consoles through the Far Cry Instincts and Far Cry Vengeance titles. 8 These titles required Ubisoft Montreal to rework much of the game as the consoles at this point in time were not as powerful as personal computers, and could not handle the wide open levels without performance problems. These games created more linear levels from the original Far Cry, added campaigns and multiplayer modes, and in some cases, changed the game's narrative to less realistic outcomes. 9 In March 2006, Ubisoft acquired all rights to the Far Cry series and a perpetual license for the CryEngine version used in the development of Far Cry 10. Ubisoft Montreal remained the principal studio developing all future Far Cry games. Far Cry 2 was announced by Ubisoft in July 2007, and featured two significant changes from the previous Far Cry games. First, it premiered the use of the Dunia engine, a modified form of the licensed CryEngine by Ubisoft Montreal. 11 The Dunia engine was developed alongside Far Cry 2 to make a fully open-world game as well as adding realistic physics and destroyable environments. 12 Second, rather than continuing in the narrative of the first Far Cry, it created a more open-ended narrative, featuring 9 playable characters and the means for the player to create their own stories with the other non-playable characters in the game with an advanced artificial intelligence system. 13 Part of the reason the narrative from Far Cry was dropped was that its main character Jack Carver was not memorable with players 14 and that the ending of the game, particularly with the changes made for Instincts and Vengeance, took a significant turn into science fiction, something that the developers wanted to avoid with Far Cry 2. 13.9 Ubisoft also recognized that through the various console versions that players would be tired of the tropics setting as well as fearing that Crytek's project with EA was also set in a tropic location, and thus opted to change the locale to the plains of Africa. 9 For Far Cry 2, the game takes place in a fictional African county in the midst of a civil war that is being financially funded by a figure known as the Jackal, whom the player character, a mercenary for hire, is tasked to bring down with the help of other mercenaries and locals. Far Cry 2 was released in October 2008, and was critically praised and commercially successful, with over 2.9 million in sales by 2009. 15 However, the game's director, Clint Hocking, noted that internally, much of the design of Far Cry 2 was haphazard. 13 Far Cry 2 had a polarizing reception from players over some of the gameplay features that were implemented to make the game feel diegetic and immerse the player into the world. Some of these disputed mechanics included the random onset of malaria that would impact the character's vision and movement until they obtained and took medicine for it, a weapon decay system that would cause guns picked up from enemies to wear down and break over use, military checkpoints that a player could clear out but which would become repopulated with enemies minutes later, and the game's buddy system, where the player could call a selected non-player character to help their character in battle, but only for a short while and would not be available until the player reached a safe house to rest. 16. Pre-production work for Far Cry 3 had reportedly started just after Far Cry 2 was shipped, with plans to keep it as a narrative sequel, but in the few years that followed, many of the development leads for Far Cry 2 left the studio. The project had a significant shift of locale, returning to a tropical island theme similar to Far Cry while retaining the open-world nature of Far Cry 2. They also looked to keep the key elements of Far Cry 2's open world that worked but add in more features to make it feel like a living world but with purpose behind how they designed it. This led to the development of Dunia Engine 2 to implement some open-world features such as weather system, which premiered in Far Cry 3. 17 Several of the questionable gameplay elements of Far Cry 2 were eliminated. 16 Further, to make this world meaningful, they eliminated the multiple player characters and instead provided one character that they could write a strong narrative around. 18 Within Far Cry 3, the player character is part of a group of adventuring tourists caught by the pirate Vaz Montenegro, who has tortured the island's native population. Far Cry 3 was formally announced in 2011 and released in November 2012. Though Far Cry 3 presented some controversial elements within its narrative, it still received positive reviews and had sold more than 10 million units by 2014. 19. The basic gameplay of Far Cry 3 established the series' general approach that was used in the next main series iterations, but shifted locales from the tropical setting. These games included Far Cry 4, 2014, set in the fictional Himalayan country of Kyrat ruled by the tyrannical Pagan Min and his royal army. 20 Far Cry 5, 2018, taking place in fictional Hope County in Montana, where a doomsday cult Eden's Gate, led by Joseph Seed, has locked down the region. 21 And Far Cry 6, 2021, set on a fictional Cuba-like island in the midst of revolution which El Presidente Anton Castillo rules as a dictator. 22 All these games maintained the theme of a lawless land and required the player to rely on a number of gameplay skills beyond combat, such as hunting and crafting to a degree, to succeed. Each iteration of the games has used the Dunya 2 engine with further enhancements to improve performance and take advantage of newer technologies. 23. Extending from the main games were smaller side games that were built using the main game's existing maps and assets. The first of these was Far Cry 3, Blood Dragon, released in May 2013. Following its announcement by Ubisoft on the previous April Fool's Day. The game, a standalone title, was an experiment release developed by Dean Evans that worked atop the existing Far Cry 3 assets, reskinning some of the game's existing maps and geometry. It took a tongue-in-cheek approach to the culture of the 1980s. 24 It became a commercial success with more than 1 million units sold. 25 Its success led to similar reskins for the next two main games in Far Cry Primal, 2016, from Far Cry 4, 26 and Far Cry New Dawn, 2019, from Far Cry 5. 27. Main series for Far Cry. Far Cry, 2004, edit. Main article, Far Cry, video game. Far Cry is a first-person shooter video game developed by Crytek Studios from Germany and published by Ubisoft on March 23, 2004 for Microsoft Windows. Far Cry sold 730,000 units within 4 months of release. The game's story follows an ex-Special Forces operator named Jack Carver, who is stranded on a mysterious archipelago in Micronesia. He is searching for a female journalist he was escorting after she went missing when their sailboat was destroyed by mercenaries. Far Cry 2, 2008, edit. Main article, Far Cry 2. Far Cry 2's plot revolves around the Jackal, an arms smuggler who has turned two fictional factions in a Central African state against each other. The game's sandbox gameplay has been highly touted, allowing the player access to 50 square kilometers of African terrain, complete with open savanna, forests, animals, and towns. The game was released on October 21, 2008 in North America and October 24, 2008 in Europe. Far Cry 3, 2012, edit. Main article, Far Cry 3. Far Cry 3 revolves around Jason Brody and his friends, American tourists who arrive on an unmarked set of islands in the Pacific and are abducted by pirates who lay claim to the land. led by the insane Vaz, voiced by Michael Mandu. Jason escapes, and must learn the ways of the jungle to survive and rescue his friends. The game was released on November 29, 2012 in Australia, November 30 in Europe, and December 4 in North America. Far Cry 4, 2014, edit. Main article, Far Cry 4. The game is set in the fictional country of Kyrat in the Himalayas region, ruled by a despotic self-appointed king named Pagan Min. 41. The protagonist, Jekyll, is caught in a war and has to overthrow Min, when he is instructed by his late mother to travel again, from the US, to his homeland to spread her ashes there. The game was released on November 18, 2014 in Australia and North America, and November 20, 2014 in Europe. 42. Far Cry 5, 2018, edit. Main article, Far Cry 5. Far Cry 5 is set in modern-day Montana in the fictional Hope County. The player takes on the role of a sheriff's deputy who becomes entangled in a violent conflict between a doomsday cult called Eden's Gate led by the father Joseph Seed and his siblings, and the resisting residents of Hope County who have seen their friends and family taken or killed by the cult. Announced in May 2017, the game was released on March 27, 2018 worldwide. 43. Far Cry 6, 2021, edit. Main article, Far Cry 6. Far Cry 6 is set on the fictional island of Yara, loosely based on modern-day Cuba, ruled by a fascist dictator Anton Castillo, based on and voiced by Giancarlo Esposito, who seeks to bring his son, Diego, based on and voiced by Anthony Gonzalez, to be his heir amidst a revolutionary uprising by freedom fighters. The game is scheduled for release on October 7, 2021. So this is the history of the Far Cry game we all play. If you would like to see more beautiful videos like this, subscribe to us, and if you click on the bell you will soon know the new videos we will post. Stay safe.